July 1209, southern France. The sun rose over the fortified city of Béziers, unaware that by nightfall it would become the stage of one of the most horrifying slaughters in medieval Europe. What could drive an army marching under the banner of Christ to butcher an entire population, children, elders, clergy, and ordinary townsfolk alike? To understand that tragedy, we must look at the ideological war tearing the region apart. For centuries, the Catholic Church ruled as the supreme spiritual authority in Europe. But in the hills of Languedoc, a movement had taken root that challenged that power, the Cathars, known to themselves as good Christians. They rejected the wealth of the Church, condemned the corruption of its clergy, and taught a stark belief that the world was split between pure spiritual good and corrupt physical evil. Where the Church preached sacraments and hierarchy, the Cathars preached simplicity, purity, and spiritual independence. To Rome, this wasn't just dissent. It was rebellion. A threat to the theological foundation of Christianity and the political order that upheld it. In 1208, Pope Innocent III issued a declaration unlike any before it, not a crusade against Muslims in distant lands, but a holy war against Christians inside Europe. His mission, wipe out the Cathar faith at its source. The conflict that followed, known as the Albigensian Crusade, would unleash a level of brutality Europe had rarely witnessed, fueled by religious zeal, political ambition, and the promise of land and spiritual absolution. The Crusader forces, an uneasy mix of northern lords seeking new territories, hired warriors, and fanatics hungry for divine glory, marched south toward Béziers, a city known for harboring Cathar believers. But Béziers was not a purely heretical stronghold. Thousands of loyal Catholics lived inside its walls, praying in the same churches as their Cathar neighbors. To many crusaders, that distinction would soon prove irrelevant. Leading the campaign was Arnaud Amalric, a papal legate appointed personally by Innocent III. When his army arrived at Béziers, they issued a demand: hand over every Cathar inside the city. The people refused, Cathars and Catholics alike vowed to defend their own. What followed became legend. As soldiers prepared to storm the gates, Amalric was reportedly asked how they should separate the heretics from the faithful during the assault. His answer, according to the Cistercian chronicler Caesarius of Heisterbach, was chilling: kill them all. God will know his own. Historians still debate whether those exact words were spoken. But whether or not the quote was real, the army behaved as though it was divine instruction. There would be no examinations, no mercy, no spared souls. Only fire, steel, and cleansing by blood. When the Crusaders finally entered Béziers, the gates fell with almost no resistance. The massacre was about to begin. At dawn on July 22, 1209, the Crusader army camped at the outskirts of Béziers, expecting a drawn-out siege. The city's walls were strong, its citizens determined to resist. Yet what happened next shattered every expectation and descended into chaos that would shock Europe for centuries. Inside Béziers, tension hung thick in the streets. The city, home to an estimated 10,000 to 14,000 people, was a diverse mix: Cathar believers, loyal Catholics, merchants, artisans, and clergy. Many citizens clung to the hope that their faith or social standing would protect them. The Cathars and their sympathizers, however, refused to surrender to the Crusaders' demand to hand over heretics. None could imagine that fate would be decided not by careful planning or military strategy, but by a single, spontaneous act of defiance. A small group of young men, driven by anger, pride, or sheer recklessness, rushed out of a side gate and attacked a handful of Crusader scouts. What might have been a minor skirmish erupted into pandemonium. Sensing an opportunity, or perhaps carried away by fervor, the Crusader army surged forward in unison, war cries echoing across the fields. The city's defenses, unprepared for a sudden all-out assault, crumbled. Within hours, Béziers had fallen, not to siege engines or ladders, but to sheer momentum and the chaos of battle. Once inside, discipline disintegrated. The mission to root out heresy turned into a bloodbath. There was no distinction between Cathar and Catholic, armed defender or innocent civilian. Streets ran with blood. Houses were looted, churches desecrated, and the elderly, women, and children were slaughtered indiscriminately. The Church of St. Mary Magdalene, a proud Romanesque structure, became one of the massacre's darkest symbols. Hundreds sought refuge beneath its vaulted arches, hoping that divine protection might spare them. But mercy had no place here. According to multiple contemporary accounts, including Caesarius of Heisterbach, the Crusaders set fire to the church with all inside. Flames consumed not only heretics, but countless innocent Catholics as well. Bones and ash mingled where the altar once stood. Other sacred spaces fared no better. Monasteries and chapels were looted, relics and manuscripts centuries old were destroyed, and clergy suspected of sympathy for heretics were slain, often regardless of any actual guilt. In the name of a holy war, the crusade had extended beyond punishing heresy, it became an assault on holiness itself. Arnaud Amalric, in his letter to Pope Innocent III, described the city's fall not with regret, but with triumph. Yet what had truly fallen was far more than Béziers, it was the boundary between faith and cruelty. By nightfall, the city lay in ruins. Homes were charred, churches gutted, and streets filled with corpses. Fires were deliberately set, reducing entire neighborhoods to ash. Those few who survived by fleeing or hiding returned to find a city unrecognizable, abandoned, and lifeless. For the Crusaders, Béziers was a warning to the rest of Languedoc: surrender, or face annihilation. And the psychological impact was immediate. Towns like Carcassonne yielded without resistance, terrified of repeating Béziers' fate. The massacre of Béziers was neither a siege nor a battle, it was execution. In one day, the city's life, its faith, and its humanity were consumed in fire and blood. Caesarius of Heisterbach immortalized Amalric's chilling words: "Kill them all. God will know his own." History remembers the violence, even when mercy does not. After the massacre of Béziers, the Albigensian Crusade continued its relentless march across southern France, leaving a trail of fire and terror in its wake. The fall of Béziers sent shockwaves through the Languedoc region. Towns and cities, once proud and independent, now faced a choice: surrender without resistance or face the same horrific fate. The psychological impact of the massacre was immediate and devastating. Word of the indiscriminate slaughter, children, women, and the elderly slaughtered alongside heretics, spread faster than the Crusaders themselves. The next major target was Carcassonne, a fortified city perched high on a hill. Unlike Béziers, Carcassonne was well defended and determined to resist. Yet the Crusaders, emboldened by their previous success, pressed on with unwavering zeal. The siege of Carcassonne would last for weeks, but the city's defenders soon realized that their fate might mirror Béziers if they refused to surrender. The memory of the indiscriminate slaughter hung over the walls like a shadow, crushing morale and instilling terror. Ultimately, Carcassonne capitulated, handing over the suspected heretics and opening its gates to the crusading army. Across the region, the consequences of the crusade went beyond military conquest. Entire communities were destabilized. Families were torn apart, villages emptied, and centuries-old social and religious networks shattered. The Cathars, once a thriving religious movement, were systematically hunted down. Many fled to remote countryside areas or mountains, while others faced capture, imprisonment, or execution. The Church sought not only to suppress heresy but to annihilate it, sending a clear message: dissent, however small, would not be tolerated. The cruelty of the crusade was compounded by the political ambitions of the northern French nobles who accompanied the papal legate. Land, wealth, and titles were often as much a motivation as faith. Regions that surrendered were punished lightly, those that resisted faced total destruction. By turning religious zeal into a tool of political domination, the Crusaders blurred the line between spiritual warfare and opportunistic conquest. Historians still debate the morality of the Albigensian Crusade. Was it purely a religious mission, a calculated act of political expansion, or a mixture of both? What remains certain is that it left southern France scarred for generations. Towns rebuilt slowly, economies collapsed, and the Cathar faith was nearly eradicated. In the centuries that followed, stories of Béziers and the surrounding massacres would serve as grim reminders of how religious fervor, combined with human ambition, could lead to incomprehensible horror. Yet even in the darkness, echoes of resistance remained. Secret Cathar communities persisted in hidden valleys, keeping their faith alive despite relentless persecution. Their courage and commitment to spiritual ideals, even in the face of annihilation, would inspire future generations and remind the world of the human cost of religious extremism. The Albigensian Crusade, beginning with Béziers, did not just destroy cities, it destroyed innocence, trust, and the belief that faith alone could protect the faithful. It marked a turning point in European history, a brutal lesson on the consequences of fanaticism, and a chilling example of what can happen when ideology is weaponized.